In the winter of 1930, Vienna slept beneath a thick shroud of fog. But on the edge of the Danube River stood a house where the music never died, a haunting melody trapped between worlds, waiting for someone to play it again. They say it all began with a violin, a beautiful instrument, carved from love and cursed by a bitter betrayal. When a young musician inherited the long-forgotten Rainer estate, he found the violin still singing its sorrowful tune, even though its player had been gone for decades. Each night the music called to him. Each note drew him deeper into the tragic story of Elise von Rainer, the woman whose heartbreak could not be silenced by death. Tonight, we return to that house by the river, to the waltz that never ended, and to the ghost who plays for eternity. This is the Silent Violin of Vienna. If you love a good ghost story, subscribe and join us, and listen closely. The song is about to begin again. I arrived in Vienna on the first evening of October 1930, just as the sky above the Danube was dissolving into a bruised purple dusk. The train from Prague hissed to a stop, and I just sat there for a moment in my compartment, listening to the ticking of my watch. Outside, the station lamps glowed like tired eyes through the mist. I'd never been to Vienna, but I'd dreamt of it. In my dreams, it was always completely silent. The invitation that brought me here was elegant, sealed with black wax and signed only by a Herr Kranz. It offered a month's work as a music tutor to a young lady, with good pay and a place to stay. My finances were thin, to say the least. Teaching violin to uninterested children in Prague wasn't paying the bills. So, a patron in Vienna, the heart of the musical world? I couldn't resist. A grizzled cabman took my small bag, and as the carriage rattled away, I pressed my face to the window. Vienna seemed subdued, like it was mourning some lost grandeur. But beneath that quiet, I felt a faint vibration, like a string plucked from far away. We traveled through winding streets to Hietzing, where old, grand villas stood like forgotten ghosts. The cab stopped before an iron gate, flanked by crumbling statues of angels. The house beyond was vast, pale, and unwelcoming, with shuttered windows and a single weak lamp burning in the entrance. The cabman muttered something that sounded like a warning, then drove off without a second glance. A butler, face long and emotionless, met me at the door. "You are Herr Weber, the musician?" "Yes," I replied, "engaged by Herr Kranz." He led me down a long corridor lined with portraits of musicians, their instruments held like items of prayer. There was a faint scent of rosine and decay in the air. Was the music in this house dead or just waiting? In a small drawing room, I finally met Herr Kranz. He was tall, unnervingly pale, with iron-gray hair. "Welcome to Vienna, Herr Weber," he said, his voice soft but commanding. "My niece, Clara, is of delicate temperament. She has been unwell. We hope the music may soothe her." "Is she a student of the violin?" I asked. He paused. "Yes, though she has not touched one since an unfortunate event last winter." He didn't elaborate, just sent me to my room. The butler led me up a wide, silent staircase. My room overlooked a tangled, dead garden. As I stood there, I heard the distant, eerie cry of a violin string snapping. "The wind, sir," the butler said flatly. "Nothing more." That night, as I tuned my violin, I felt a presence. The air grew heavy, the candle flame flickered, and one of my violin strings quivered without my touch. At supper, an empty place was set at the table. No one mentioned it. Once, I thought I heard a faint, trembling violin note from upstairs. Herr Kranz's face darkened. "Do not mind that," he said quietly. "The house is old. It remembers." Later, he showed me the music room. It was filled with instruments covered in dust sheets. In the center, on a stand, was a violin the color of dried blood. I was drawn to it, but as I reached out, Kranz's voice cut through the air. "Not that one. You will use your own." I asked whose it was. "It belonged to my late wife," he said, his tone a mix of reverence and fear. "Do not wander the house at night, Herr Weber. Old houses make strange sounds." When he left, I couldn't resist. I drew my bow across my own violin, just one long, soft note, and it felt like the house itself answered. A second tone rose to meet mine, faint and trembling from another room. It came from upstairs. My heart pounded as I followed the sound, a slow, faltering waltz. It led me to a door, slightly ajar. I peered inside. A young woman sat by the window, her face pale in the moonlight, her hair almost white. She held a violin, her hands trembling. She was playing with such fragile grace, but there was no bow on the strings. The sound just poured out, pure and mournful. Suddenly she stopped. Her eyes, the color of ice and filled with an ancient sadness, met mine. "You should not be here," she whispered. I stammered, "I beg your pardon, I heard the music." She gave a slight, sad smile. "No one hears it but me." Just then, a door opened behind me. Herr Kranz stood there, his face a mask of fury. "Go to your room, Herr Weber, now." I retreated, hearing him murmur urgently to the girl before the door closed, and the house fell silent once more. I couldn't sleep. The ghostly melody haunted me. I went to the window and looked out at the mist-covered garden. A figure in a white gown stood near the dead fountain, a violin gleaming in her hands. She was playing, though I heard no sound. As I stared, the reflection of my own face vanished from the glass. For a terrifying second, it was as if I was outside in her place, watching myself from the dark. Then a single, piercingly beautiful note reached me and the glass cracked under my fingers. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe, and see you next time. When morning came, I found myself doubting everything. The cracked window pane? Maybe it was always there, something I'd missed in the flickering candlelight. The figure in the garden, the silent music, the girl at the window. Were they just tricks of a tired mind, amplified by the gloom of this old house? But, as I got dressed, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me all night, just on the other side of sleep. The butler, Johann, met me on the staircase. "Breakfast is served, Herr Weber," he announced, his voice flat, all duty, no warmth. In the dining room, Herr Kranz was already at the table, his posture perfect, his face hidden behind a newspaper. "I trust you rested well," he said, not even looking up. I played along. "As well as one might in a new bed, though the wind was quite strong last night." A faint flicker of something, amusement, warning, crossed his face. "Vienna has many winds, Herr Weber. The old ones whisper through these rooms. Best to ignore them." Later that day, Johann led me to the music room. This time, daylight flooded in, revealing a world of dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. And there, in a chair by the window, was the girl. Clara. In the light, she seemed younger, but her eyes held a weariness far beyond her years. "Herr Weber," she said softly, "my uncle told me you would come." I bowed. "Fräulein Clara, it is an honor." She gave a hollow laugh. "You may not think so when you have heard me play." Her hands trembled as she lifted her violin. She drew the bow, and a sound so fragile, so close to silence, emerged, and then died. "I cannot," she whispered. "It does not answer me." I tried to encourage her, but my words felt empty. "No," she insisted. "It isn't my music. It's hers." "Whose?" I asked. She looked towards the window. "My aunt's." My blood ran a little colder. "The late Frau Kranz?" She nodded. "They said she was the finest violinist in Vienna. They still say so, even after her death. I learned from her shadow." Her gaze drifted to the dark violin case in the corner, the one her uncle had forbidden me to touch. "She played that one," Clara said. "The Stradivarius. They say it sang differently for every hand that held it. For hers, it sang of glory. For me, it sings of grief. "You've tried to play it?" I asked, moving closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Only once. The night she died." The air in the room grew heavy. I heard her playing, long after midnight. I went to her door. She told me not to enter, but I did. She turned and smiled at me. A glorious, beautiful smile. Then the bow snapped, she fell, and the violin. It screamed. I still hear it. We tried to play a simple duet, and for a moment it was magical. Her playing grew stronger, more confident, as if guided by an invisible hand. The music swelled, hauntingly beautiful. But when we finished, the final note didn't stop. It hung in the air, vibrating from the walls, played by no one. Clara dropped her violin. "Do you hear it?" I did. Just then, Krantz burst in, his face like thunder. "Enough! You will stop at once." The sound vanished. Clara looked terrified, but he dismissed her without a second glance. He turned to me, his voice cold as ice. "I warned you not to awaken what sleeps in this house. Silence is our only peace." "With respect," I argued, "music is your niece's solace." His lips twisted into a snarl. "Solace? You call it solace to invite her spirit back?" He'd said too much and knew it. "Enough questions. Your lessons will be in daylight hours only. Do you understand?" I understood perfectly. There was a mystery here, and I was going to solve it. That night, sleep was impossible. The house was listening. I took a candle and walked down the hall, where a door stood slightly ajar. Herr Kranz's study. On his desk was a photo of a stunning woman holding that same dark violin. Frau Elise Krantz. Beside it was an unfinished piece of music. Nocturne for the Departed. The final notes were just gone. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked. I spun around. Clara stood in the doorway, her face a pale mask. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Neither should you," I replied. She came closer. She doesn't like it when people touch her things. She watches. She listens. Sometimes, she still plays. "Tell me what happened that night," I pressed. She shuddered. "My uncle says her heart failed, but I saw the bow splinter. I saw the strings cut her hand. The blood fell on the wood, and the violin drank it. Since then, it plays by itself." As she spoke, a single, perfect note sounded from deep within the house. Clara grabbed my arm. "She's awake." I blew out the candle. The note swelled, vibrating through the very bones of the house. Then came footsteps, descending the stairs. They stopped right outside our door. The handle turned. The door creaked open to an empty corridor filled with a strange, silvery light. And through the silence came a melody, played on a lone violin. The unfinished Nocturne. "She's still playing," Clara whispered in terror. The music grew, a phantom symphony until the photograph on the desk shattered. Then total, oppressive silence. Clara collapsed. "She never rests," she sobbed. "She never will." I helped her up, my logical mind scrambling for an explanation. She looked at me with such pity. "There is an explanation," she said softly. "The violin. Thanks for watching. If you're as captivated by this mystery as I am, make sure to follow and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next." For 3 days, an unnatural stillness filled the house. Herr Krantz locked himself in his study. Clara stayed in her room, and only Johann, the old servant, moved like a silent shadow. But I could feel a storm gathering. I spent those days in the music room, trying to master the haunted nocturne. The melody was a beautiful, tormented thing that twisted and turned, never finding peace. Every time I tried to play the final note, my own violin seemed to resist, as if guided by another will. On the 4th evening, Clara appeared in the doorway, pale and almost translucent in the candlelight. "You shouldn't play that," she whispered. "It isn't finished." I told her that's exactly why I had to play it. That unfinished music was like an unanswered prayer. Her voice trembled as she replied, "It was written for the dead, Herr Weber. It doesn't want to be completed." Suddenly, we heard a faint rustle from the corridor, the whisper of a violin bow brushing against strings. Clara stiffened. "She's here." I looked behind her and saw a reflection in the mirror, a tall, elegant woman in an old-fashioned gown holding the dark violin. Her face was a blur, her eyes like hollow gleams. As Clara turned with a gasp, the reflection vanished. In that same instant, the real violin on its stand trembled and crashed to the floor. Herr Kranz burst in, his eyes blazing with fury. "What have you done?" he roared. He seized the instrument, cradling it like a child. "You will not touch this again. You will leave tomorrow morning." I was stunned. "You dismiss me because your house is haunted?" He gave a strange, bitter laugh. If only it were so simple. After he left, Clara sank into a chair, her eyes full of tears. "You must go," she said. "He won't forgive this." But I couldn't leave. There was a truth here, a secret binding her family to that instrument, and I had to know what it was. Her warning chilled me to the bone. "Then you'll die as she did." That night, sleep was impossible. The wind howled, and every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. At midnight, I lit a candle and crept to Herr Kranz's study. The key was still in the lock. Inside, I found a cabinet containing boxes of old documents. One was labeled Elise Kranz, 1929. I opened it. Inside were letters and a leather-bound journal. It was hers. I began to read her entries, a story of obsession and fear. She wrote of the violin's music haunting her, of seeing a figure behind her as she played, of a legend that the instrument was stained with the blood of a murdered musician. Her final entry, from the night she died, was terrifying. "If it must end, let it end in music. I will play the nocturne tonight. Perhaps then it will release me." As the clock struck 1, the chilling sound of a violin started from somewhere upstairs. It was the same unfinished nocturne. I followed the sound to the music room. Inside, the dark violin floated in midair, playing by itself. The bow moved with a ghostly grace. As I stepped closer, my candle went out, plunging me into darkness. I reached for the bow, and an unseen force threw me backward as the music exploded into a deafening chaos. I woke at dawn with Herr Kranz and Johann standing over me. "It was playing by itself," I managed to say. Tears streamed down Kranz's face. "Even death cannot silence her," he whispered and ordered Johann to lock the violin away in the cellar. 2 quiet days passed. Then, on the 3rd night, Clara came to my room, a small brass key in her hand. "They've hidden it," she whispered, "but she's still here. Johann says you're the only one who can end it." "Why me?" I asked. "Because she chose you," Claire replied. "She answered you. If you finish the nocturne, perhaps it will release her, or claim you." We went to the old abandoned chapel in the garden. A hidden staircase led down to a cellar. Inside, on a table, lay the violin, its surface gleaming. I felt its pull, an irresistible urge to play. Ignoring Clara's pleas, I raised the bow. The melody poured out of me, or through me, and the world dissolved into music. As I played the final, resolving note, a scream erupted. Not from me, but from the violin itself. A figure rose from the darkness, Elise Kranz, her face both terrible and triumphant as the last note died. Then she was gone. The violin shattered. When we emerged, the house seemed released, finally at peace. Herr Kranz met us, and seeing the broken instrument, he whispered, "So it ends." But I knew it didn't. As we walked back, a single, wavering note drifted from the open windows, played by no living hand. Thanks for joining me on this chilling tale. If you love stories that send a shiver down your spine, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more mysteries. See you next time. I woke up to the sound of music, but it wasn't a melody. It was a broken sigh, dragged across strings, a trembling bow scraping out pure pain. The sound crept up through the floorboards, seeping from the old ballroom below my room. My heart just froze. It was the violin again. Still in my nightclothes, I got out of bed and followed the sound down the long, dark corridor. The house was drenched in a gray dawn, the light outside thick with fog. The bowing stopped for a moment, and in its place I heard someone weeping. A quiet, hopeless sound, like a soul begging to be forgotten. When I pushed open the ballroom doors, no one was there, but the violin stood on its stand, the bow resting upright against the strings, vibrating on its own as if invisible fingers were still pulling notes from its soul. I whispered into the emptiness, "Who are you?" The echo answered, not in words, but in music. The violin began again, slow and mournful. A single note quivered in the air, long and agonized, followed by a sequence so beautiful it actually hurt to listen. It felt like someone trying to speak through music, confessing a sin that could never be forgiven. And then I saw her. In the corner of the ballroom, near a cracked mirror, the figure of a woman appeared. Her dress was from another century, the lace torn and yellowed with time. Her face was pale, almost translucent. She was young, maybe my age, but her eyes carried centuries of sorrow. She looked right at me. And when she did, the violin screamed, the melody twisting into something violent and desperate. I covered my ears, but the sound felt like a knife in my mind. The candles flared. The walls shook. The bow flew from the stand and clattered to the ground beside my feet. Then, silence. The woman was gone. Only the violin remained, humming faintly, a single string broken, snapped in two as if by invisible hands. I knelt down and touched the instrument. It was warm, almost burning. Behind me, footsteps echoed. It was Clara, my housekeeper, clutching her shawl. "Monsieur, you shouldn't come here at dawn," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She plays before sunrise. Always has." "She?" I asked. Clara's eyes darted toward the violin. "The lady of the house, Elise von Reiner." The violin was hers. I felt the blood drain from my face. "You mean the one who died?" Clara finished. "She drowned in the Danube the night her fiancé was found hanging in this very room. Some say she cursed the violin before she jumped." The air grew colder. I stared at the silent instrument, its strings still vibrating. "Why does she play now?" I asked. Clara just shook her head. "Because she cannot stop. The music binds her here. Every note is her sorrow. Every pause her grief. When the violin sings, she remembers." I tried to go about my day, but my mind was chained to that melody. I felt it under my skin, like a pulse out of rhythm with my own. That evening, I carried the violin to my study. I had to understand it to end the haunting. Under the lamp, I examined every inch. And there, inside the ribs, I saw faint carvings, tiny letters barely visible. I held it to the light. It read, "For Emile, until death unites our song." Elise and Emile, her fiancé, the one who died in this house. I realized then that the violin wasn't cursed by hatred, but by a love too strong to die. I lifted the bow and touched it to the strings. The first note quivered weakly. The next came easier, until a melody unfolded, hesitant but alive. It was a waltz, soft, melancholic, incomplete. Halfway through, the room grew cold again. I could see my own breath. In the reflection of the window pane, I saw her standing behind me, Elise. But this time, she was smiling. Her lips moved, but I heard no words, only the faint echo of her melody continuing where mine had stopped. Our music blended, one mortal, one spirit, filling the air with both beauty and despair. When the last note faded, the violin split. A thin crack ran down its body and the strings snapped again. Elise vanished with the sound. The silence was so heavy it crushed my chest. The violin, now broken, seemed finally at peace. but I wasn't. I could still feel her, watching, waiting. That night, sleep was impossible. Just before dawn, I heard the faintest stroke of a bow again, but it wasn't coming from the ballroom. It was coming from my own room. The violin was gone from my desk. When I turned, it was resting in the chair beside my bed. Mended, whole, the crack completely vanished. The bow was moving slowly across the strings, guided by invisible hands. And, in the faint light of morning, I heard a woman's voice for the first time. Soft, broken, whispering through the music. "Play for me again." The candle beside me went out. The music stopped. And I realized I had already begun to forget what my own voice sounded like. The violin was no longer silent. It was calling. Thanks for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this and want to hear more tales from the shadows, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one. The city of Vienna. It didn't feel like Vienna anymore. The snow outside the manor seemed to echo the ghostly notes of a violin, as if the whole city was trapped in its melody. Days passed, but the air inside the house never changed. Stale, cold, and heavy with breath that wasn't mine. Every morning, I'd find the violin somewhere new. Once, on the windowsill, its bow swinging like a pendulum. Another time, right beside my pillow, the strings vibrating faintly as if someone had just touched them. I didn't dare tell my sister Clara. I was afraid she'd leave, and I needed her here. A reminder that I wasn't alone with the dead. Sleep became a stranger. Instead, visions haunted me. I saw Elise, the manor's former resident, dancing in the ballroom. Not with joy, but in torment, spinning endlessly in a silent waltz. Her dress trailed water that shimmered like black pearls, and her eyes, her pleading eyes, always found mine. One night, I couldn't resist. I went back to the ballroom. The doors creaked open, and there she was. Framed by moonlight pouring through the frosted glass, her hair clinging wet to her shoulders. She was holding the violin. And this time, she spoke. Her voice was like wind brushing against glass. "Do you hear it too?" I swallowed hard. "Hear what?" "The song beneath the river," she whispered. "He's still waiting there." Before I could answer, she began to play. The melody was mournful but filled with a terrible beauty. A confession turned into sound. As she played, mist filled the room. I could smell the Danube, damp and cold. Water seeped from between the floorboards, spreading like dark veins. The ballroom was becoming the river. In its reflection I saw not my own face, but a man's. Pale, drowned, his eyes open but lifeless. "Elise," I whispered. "Who is he?" She stopped playing, the bow trembling in her hand. "Emile," she breathed. "He promised to play one last waltz with me, but he betrayed me. He played alone, and now the song is unfinished." The water rose higher, chilling my legs. I backed away, but she followed me. "You can finish it," she said softly. "You can free me." Then, with a sudden cry, she thrust the violin into my hands. The moment my fingers touched the wood, pain tore through me. 1,000 memories that weren't mine flooded my mind. I saw Elise and Emile laughing by the Danube. I saw them rehearsing in this very ballroom, their love blooming with every note. And then I saw the night they died. A confrontation. A torn letter. Elise weeping as Emile's eyes grew wild with despair. And then, the river. The silence. The images vanished, leaving me gasping on the cold marble floor. Elise was gone. Only the violin remained, its strings damp and glistening. When Clara found me at dawn, I was still there, trembling, whispering the same words over and over. "Finish the song." The next day, I went to the city archives. An old clerk looked through brittle ledgers. "Emil von Reiner," he said. "A violinist of some fame before the war. Died tragically in 1902. They say he and his fiancée were cursed." He told me Emile was composing a piece for her, the song Beneath the River. But no one ever heard it completed. His sheet music vanished the night he died. Some say she drowned herself trying to play it. That night, back in the manor, I opened the violin case one last time. Beneath the lining, I found it. A folded, water-stained sheet of music, half-finished notes, the missing waltz. I set the paper on the piano, placed the violin under my chin, and began to play. The house started to tremble. Paintings tilted, windows shuddered. I felt something moving through me, using my hands, my breath. It wasn't me playing anymore. It was Elise. The music grew louder, brighter. Then I saw her, dancing in ecstasy, her gown flowing like liquid moonlight. Emile appeared beside her, his form faint. He reached for her, and she for him. Their hands met as I struck the final chord. The sound hung in the air. Then, silence. The house exhaled. The two figures faded into each other and vanished. The violin slipped from my hands and splintered on the floor. Clara found me at sunrise, sitting among the fragments. "You freed her," she whispered, weeping. But I wasn't so sure, because when I looked toward the Danube that morning, I saw the surface ripple, and faintly I heard the waltz again. Not from the house, from beneath the water, and for the first time I wondered, had I freed Elise? Or had she just invited me to join her dance? What do you think happened? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more tales from the shadows. Thank you for watching. It had been 3 days since the violin shattered, and yet the music had not stopped. It drifted through the halls of the Rayner estate, woven into the very walls themselves, a faint, endless waltz that never resolved. Clara begged me to leave. She insisted the air in the house was wrong, that she heard voices humming through the pipes at night. I told her she was imagining things, but I knew she wasn't. I heard the whispers too, a man and a woman, their murmurs blending with the melody. The violin was gone, but I could still feel it beneath my skin. My fingers would twitch, as if still holding the bow. My throat ached as though I'd been screaming in my sleep. On the 4th night, I dreamt of Elise again. She was standing by the river, her back to me, her gown torn and soaked. The moon reflected off the Danube's black surface like a blade. When she turned, her eyes were empty sockets filled with water, her lips moving without a sound. Then she raised a hand, and I felt something seize my heart, pulling, dragging me toward the current. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The window beside my bed was open, the curtains trembling, and on the floor, scattered like ash, lay the splinters of the violin I had buried in the attic. I don't remember digging it up. By morning, Clara was gone. Her shawl was missing from its hook, her room empty, save for her rosary on the table, its beads broken, one of them blackened like coal. I searched the estate for hours, calling her name. When I finally reached the ballroom, I froze. The great, cracked mirror where Elise first appeared was mended. Not perfectly, but enough that my reflection looked whole again. I moved closer, heart pounding, and as I did, my reflection began to smile before I did. The smile was not mine. "Elise," I whispered. The glass shivered, and then the reflection reached out a hand. Its fingers pressed against the other side of the mirror, delicate and pale. I should have run, but I didn't. Something inside me ached to touch her again, to understand her sorrow, her music, her curse. I lifted my hand and placed it against hers. The glass rippled like water. Cold rushed through my arm, flooding my chest. I couldn't breathe. The room spun, and in the next heartbeat I was no longer standing before the mirror. I was inside it. The world on the other side was dim and blue, as if submerged beneath the Danube. The sound of the waltz was louder here, distorted, beautiful, eternal. And there she was, waiting. Elise smiled faintly. "You came back," she said. "Where am I?" I whispered. "Where the song never ends," she answered, "where love cannot die." Behind her, I saw figures, dozens of them, swaying to the same ghostly rhythm. "What do you want from me?" She touched my face, her fingers cold as stone. "You played the song. You finished it. Now it must live through you." The waltz grew louder, faster. I tried to pull away, but her grip tightened. "Let me go!" I shouted. Elisa's expression darkened. "You promised," she said, her voice echoing with fury. "You finished our song. You are part of it now." The water churned, and suddenly I was thrown from the mirror. I landed hard on the ballroom floor. The mirror cracked again, a spiderweb across the center. My reflection stared back, but it was Elisa's face blinking from within the fractures. The house roared with sound. Every piano, every pipe vibrated with the waltz. I crawled toward the violin's splinters, desperate to destroy them, but they began to move on their own, the wood reassembling, the strings reforming. Within seconds, the violin was whole again, gleaming. The bow lifted from the floor and hovered in the air. The first note rang out, perfect and terrible. I felt her presence behind me, her voice a whisper in my ear. "Play." My hands moved before my mind could resist. The bow slid across the strings and the waltz began once more. The melody was flawless, terrible, divine. I could feel her sorrow consuming my every breath. I couldn't stop. The house pulsed with the rhythm, the windows shattering one by one. Outside, the Danube stirred, rising as though answering the song. I played until dawn, until my fingers bled. When the final note faded, the violin fell silent. Then, from the river, came the echo of the melody. I walked to the window. The mist above the Danube shimmered, forming two faint figures, a man and a woman, dancing their endless waltz upon the water. I saw my own face in the reflection beside them. The violin hummed once more, a single note, low, mournful, eternal. I realized then that I had not freed Elise. She had freed herself by claiming me. Thank you for joining me in this tale of haunting music. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next descent into the unknown. Stay safe, and see you in the shadows. The snow had stopped falling over Vienna, but the air carried a stillness that felt unnatural, as if the city itself were listening. The streets around the Rainer estate lay empty, untouched by footsteps or carriage wheels. Inside, silence reigned. I hadn't slept in 2 days. The violin sat on my desk, perfectly restored, gleaming under the faint glow of candlelight. I tried locking it away, burying it beneath books and cloth, but every time I turned around, it was there again, waiting. Each night the melody returned, faint at first, then swelling until the walls trembled. I could no longer tell where the music ended and my own thoughts began. The waltz had invaded my mind, its rhythm aligning with my heartbeat, its refrain breathing with my lungs. Sometimes, in the corners of the room, I saw her, Elise, pale, luminous, no longer weeping, merely watching. She did not speak now. She only waited. By dawn of the third day, I made my decision. I would take the violin back to the river, back to where it all began. The streets of Vienna were wrapped in fog, the gas lamps glowing like dying embers. I carried the violin beneath my coat, feeling its weight pulse faintly like a living thing. Every step toward the Danube grew heavier, as if unseen hands were trying to drag me backward. When I reached the riverbank, the water lay dark and still. The sound of the city had vanished entirely. Only the faint hum of the current remained, a rhythm, quiet but constant, echoing the waltz. I stood there, shivering, the violin in my hands. "This is where it ends," I whispered. But as I raised my arm to throw it, the bow slipped from my coat and struck the snow at my feet. A single string hummed in response, low, pleading, alive. And from the fog I heard her voice, "Don't leave me." I froze. The mist thickened, taking shape, a silhouette of Elise, her gown rippling as if underwater. Her eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the light from the city behind her. "Elise," I said, my voice breaking, "it has to end. You can't stay here." She shook her head slowly. "You don't understand. You finished the song. You are part of it now." The river stirred. Ripples spread across the surface, widening until I could see faint figures beneath, the outlines of dancers swaying in rhythm, the ghosts of all who had played before me. "Elise, please," I whispered, "let me go." She reached out a hand, her voice trembling. "You freed me from silence. Now stay with me and the music will never die." Her hand hovered inches from my chest. The violin began to vibrate violently in my grasp, the strings singing without touch, a crescendo that shook the ground. I took one step back. "If this is love," I said softly, "then let it end where it began." And before the fear could stop me, I hurled the violin into the Danube. The moment it struck the water, the sound changed, the melody warping, twisting into a scream that echoed across the frozen river. The fog exploded outward in a rush of wind and cold. Elise's face contorted, her voice breaking into a cry of anguish that shook the air. Then, silence. The river went still. The mist faded. Elise was gone. I fell to my knees, the cold biting through my skin. For a long time, there was nothing but the sound of the wind and my own breath. The violin had vanished beneath the dark water, its song finally swallowed by the Danube. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something on the shore, a single string, thin as hair, glimmering faintly in the moonlight. I reached down and touched it. It was warm. A note rang out, soft, perfect, impossibly distant. The air shimmered, and then I heard it again, that same waltz, faint but unmistakable, rising from beneath the water. It wasn't Elise's voice this time. It was mine. I ran from the river. I don't remember how far or for how long. When I returned to the Rayner estate, the house seemed different. Quieter, almost abandoned. I went to the mirror in the ballroom, my reflection staring back at me. At first, I saw myself. But then, slowly, her face appeared within mine. Eyes pale, mouth curved in a faint, sorrowful smile. "Elise," I whispered. The reflection blinked, and when I did, she did not. That was when I understood. The curse had never belonged to her alone. The song needed a voice, and I had given it one. The next day, they found my journal. This journal, on the floor beside the broken mirror. No one knows what became of me. The townspeople say they still hear a violin playing along the riverbank on winter nights. A melody, soft and endless, carried by the mist. They call it the silent violin of Vienna. But those who truly listen say the silence isn't empty. They say it breathes. They say it waits. And when the fog rolls in from the Danube, if you listen closely enough, you might hear the faintest whisper within the waltz, a single word carried by the wind. Play. Thank you so much for joining me for this story. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe, and see you next time.